Although it has some serious competition among Nintendo's library, I'd say the Donkey Kong Country series is among the company's finest collection of platformers. But while I believe Retro Studios' Tropical Freeze stands as the franchise's top title, we're taking a look at Rare's entries that started it all, and asking which game in the original trilogy could be considered the best. My experience with the series started back in the 90s with Donkey Kong Country 2. I'd play or watch my best friend and his brother go through it whenever their cousin lent them the cartridge, and it quickly became a personal favorite of mine. It wasn't until the Game Boy Advance that I was able to play the first and third games in the franchise, and the original Super Nintendo versions had to wait until their release on the Wii Shop channel. To the untrained eye, the trilogy may look like the same game with different coats of paint, but there's more under the surface. In broad strokes, Donkey Kong Country could be considered the most iconic of the lineup thanks to its memorable jungle backdrop and representation in Super Smash Bros. But the second game carved out a dedicated cult following of its own. Donkey Kong Country 3, on the other hand, was overshadowed by the launch of the Nintendo 64 2 months before its debut and doesn't hold the same acclaim as its predecessors. The first game has the least unique elements across the three, but it's the only one to feature Donkey Kong's signature hand slap, which can be used to uncover secrets lying underground. The second swapped out the titular ape and introduced Dixie Kong, who brought gliding to the series with her helicopter spin, a technique that provides more freedom and control to platforming. Diddy and Dixie's similar size also paved the way for team-ups, which allows the backup Kong to climb atop the active Kong's shoulders, permitting the player to reach new heights or take out enemies from a distance. At first glance, the third game appears to be a step backwards by removing Diddy for Kitty. Dixie's new teammate seems like a less compelling copy of the Thai-sporting simian who started the series, but he actually offers more than its predecessors. While his standard attack is a roll just like Donkey Kong, Kitty is able to skip across water if the player times their button presses appropriately. Inspirations pulled from DK don't stop there though. Although less elegant and slower than Donkey Kong's hand slap, Kitty can also smash the ground to reveal secrets thanks to the changes made to the team toss. While Diddy and Dixie threw the same regardless of who was in the lead, Dixie and Kitty provided options thanks to their differences in strength and weight. When Kitty tosses Dixie, it's much the same as how it was handled in the second game, but if Dixie tosses Kitty, the onesie warrior cuts his arc short to slam down to the ground and expose hidden items or pathways. It's not a bad substitute for the hand slap per se, but managing monkeys before a toss does disrupt flow a little. Animal Buddies, mountable rides accessible by cracking open specific crates, also saw an evolution throughout the trilogy. Donkey Kong Country began with Rambi, Expresso, Winky, and Engard, who were all capable of basic movement and a specialty like attacking or extending airtime, while the second game brought in the likes of Squitter, Rattly, and Squawks proper, introducing novel ways to forge new routes through the sky. Moreover, Animal Buddies past and present could be made mandatory by way of barrel transformations, enforcing level design and gameplay opportunities that cater to their strengths. The third game took Animal Buddies a step further with Ellie and offered a companion with a wider skill set and shortcomings. The elephant could carry barrels and store water to launch later, but had a fear of rats that made standard platforming sections into moments of consideration. For the most part, level design across the first two games were pretty consistent and solid all around. There was variety with barrel, minecart, and underwater stages with a few one-offs here and there to ensure the adventure never grew stale. Donkey Kong Country 3 took it the furthest with its variety, but did so without taking the focus off traditional platforming, defeating squeals on wheels to unlock doors, evading the reticle of a crazed Kremling, and climbing a burning rope to the top of a scrolling stage are just a few examples of how levels differentiated themselves from the standard structure. There's a stage that goes a little bit off the rails, but we can overlook one small hiccup in an otherwise fantastic selection of stages. Overworld maps saw growth from the series' debut too. Donkey Kong Country was a lot like its contemporaries in the first game, offering nothing more than a simple hub to pick levels across DK Island. The second game was much the same with Crocodile Isle, but it offered a bit more with the inclusion of Clubba's kiosk. Players could spend Krem coins there to gain access to new levels in the Lost World, and the stage they unlocked was determined by which kiosk they visited. Donkey Kong Country 3 had the best overworld among the trilogy though. Unlike its predecessors and contemporaries, the Northern Cremisphere also had its own secrets for traversing and unlocking new areas. The Brothers Bear scattered throughout the land provided items that could be traded or forfeited to access new locations or earn banana birds, collectibles necessary for completing the game. Most banana birds could be discovered in caves spread across the overworld, but the rounds as Simon Says you have to beat once inside them were kinda cruel. My trick for completing the hardest among them was recording the crystal sequence on my phone and following it as a guide, but before technology was a competent tool at my disposal, I'd scribble numbers corresponding to their position on a piece of paper, and hope I could keep pace while trying to properly line up the digits with the crystals. The results weren't always reliable. There are even opportunities to deviate and explore some worlds before others, or actively switch between them at your discretion. Choosing between Mechanos and Cotton Top Cave was a freedom seldom afforded to players in platformers during that period. Thanks to the visuals rendered through Rare's SGI Challenge workstation, the series had a distinct look for its time too. The character animations in particular were dynamic and made the cast feel alive. When there was a Kong tagging along behind you though, that lively illusion fell a little flat, and just became nonsensical with Dixie and her airborne antics. But there was more to the look of the game than just modern technological advancements. The games were brimming with charm and had strong thematic design. Donkey Kong Country 2 in particular felt strong in this department. It put the first game's Kremlings in the role of pirates and shipped them off to their native island of Crocodile Isle, which felt like an appropriate direction following the Gangplank Galleon showdown that preceded it. The island itself was befitting of the villains too, being a dark, gloomy, unkempt swamp, and baddies beyond the Kremlings adopted pirate gear to bring the theme together. It's easy to put the second game on a pedestal for its presentation, and that's especially true after you see the tumble the third game took with its questionable character design. The Kremlings degraded into color-coded crocodiles with a whimsical tone at odds with the cast of previous installments, and there wasn't a clear unifying theme that brought its world together. In terms of music, the trilogy had a bit more balance. The first Donkey Kong Country was ambient, with less pronounced melodies across most of its jams. There's songs you can appreciate for accentuating a soothing atmosphere, but they're not on the same level as Donkey Kong Country 2's captivating collection of melodies. Few themes hit the heights of Haunted Hall or Flight of the Zingers, and nothing kicks off a saga quite like the second game's opening theme, K. Rool Returns. The third game saw a different soundtrack between the original Super Nintendo game and its Game Boy Advance remake. Neither of them overtook the second score, but they both featured plenty of memorable jams like the GBA's Stilt Village and the Super Nintendo's Water World. Both soundtracks of Donkey Kong Country 3 felt like they were finding common ground between the music of its predecessors by featuring ambience coupled with memorable melodies. I think the GBA version went a little overboard on ambient openings, but it had catchier tunes overall compared to the original. As was typical of traditional platformers, the plot behind each game was thin, but offered enough to bridge the games together and provide motivation for the journeys. In the first game, Donkey Kong and Diddy swing into action after King K. Rool and his Kremlings steal their banana hoard. The second game raises the stakes, but still keeps everything localized. Captain K. Rool, as he's now dubbed, kidnaps Donkey Kong and takes him to the neighboring island of Crocodile Isle. It's up to Diddy and his girlfriend Dixie to traverse the hostile environment and bring their buddy home. The third game made abductions into a tradition and once again raised the stakes by having Diddy kidnapped alongside Donkey Kong. It wasn't particularly inspired, but at least it was continuing to turn the damsel in distress trope on its head. This time around though, the culprit responsible for the abductions was an unfamiliar villain named Chaos. There was even a twist that came in the end to make up for the game's unoriginality too. The mastermind behind the Chaos Core was actually King K. Rool, or Baron K. Roolenstein as he was going by now. While it added a lot to the series as an overworld, the Northern Hemisphere that played host to the trilogy's final outing felt like a missed opportunity when it came to narrative. Although it would demand a name change, the Northern Hemisphere felt like a good opportunity to expand the world and introduce a new threat. The conflict with the Kremlings felt appropriately scaled and concluded in the first two installments, but expanding their influence to the third game's scope robs them of their value as villains. Instead of a menace from Crocodile Isle that was vanquished, the Kremlings just became an evil force that occupied everywhere. But that's just my take on it. To me, coming to a verdict on which installment is best just comes down to the judging criteria. In terms of presentation, I'd say Donkey Kong Country 2 is the best by a landslide, but if we're speaking strictly from a gameplay perspective, I'd say Donkey Kong Country 3 takes the top slot. I'm sure my opinion doesn't reflect the majority here though, so let's pass the question off to you. Considering everything from audio to gameplay, which game among the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy do you think is best? Vote using the card above or share your opinion in the comments below. I'm curious to see how my opinion measures up to yours. Whichever one you pick though, I think we can agree that they're all rare gems.